I want to turn our attention now as we look at not just the year in review, but the year ahead. We've had some big challenges, and many of them are still going to be on the table when our politicians, both federal and provincial, get back to work in the new year. And to talk about that going forward, pleased to welcome to the program John Best, publisher of the Bay Observer. John, thanks for the time. Hope you're doing well during the holiday season. Hope you're doing well during the blizzard.
Doing just fine, Bill. We're all tucked in here and just not going to go anywhere for at least 24 hours.
All right. Well, hopefully you've got the crystal ball all polished up here, because I wanted to ask you about 2023. This has been an up and down year. I mean, as you and I have talked about in the past, politics can always be up and down. But you look at like a year ago, Doug Ford had a terribly low approval rating, and everybody thought, well, he's done. That's the one-term premier. He had a huge victory in the provincial election that ended up in both the NDP and Liberals losing their seats. Ford rode that crest, but he seems to be down the dumps again. We're looking at some of the latest polling. Talk to us about how he has survived this and what we can look forward to in 2023.
Well, with the election, I think it was really a case where the opposition really sort of handed it to him. The Liberals were just in terrible shape with their leadership. Stephen Del Duca did not catch on in any way with voters. And if you really looked at his campaign, he seemed to be still making the same kind of promises that, that many people had left the Liberal Party for, because it had moved really almost to the left of the NDP. And he seemed to be following in that tradition and maybe thinking that the voters had just made a mistake, or maybe they were a little cranky. And the answer was no, Stephen. They really meant it when they reduced the party to a little more than half a dozen seats. And so he was, and with Andrea, it was her fourth or fifth election as leader. Mm-hmm. So we didn't really, he kind of wanted, it's kind of like the kids' hockey games where they stop putting up the score after 6 goals, and So yeah, but his popularity is definitely on the slide now, and it's mainly due to these measures. Not only the green belt, but people are really afraid of what his housing plan is going to do to the way cities and communities look. And this strong mayor thing, I think, has really backfired on him. That's something that I think anybody intuitively just says that we've seen it around the world, that whenever you see a temporary suspension of democracy, those temporary suspensions, at least in other countries, tend to get permanent. So, I think there's some real concern about that, the optics of that particular policy right now.
Well, as you say, it's not a new idea, not a new concept, but did the Ford government take it too far? I mean, because I've heard examples of the strong mayor system where essentially what it means is the mayor gets to pick the staff and maybe even the managers of all the departments, so he has a team there. But they seem to have taken it to the next level and said, no, you can win votes now, even if you don't have a majority on council. That's like I say, that's the shot at democracy right there.
It is, and I frankly wouldn't have a problem with a mayor having more power when it comes to dealing with the bureaucracy of a city. I think there is an anomaly when a mayor only has one vote, even though he or she have a citywide mandate that the rest of council doesn't have. So yeah, picking senior staff, absolutely. I think that's something that people would probably accept. But this idea of overruling a vote of council, that's quite another matter. And now, I suppose some would argue that, if you've been around long enough, you remember the Board of Control. It took a 2/3 majority of council to override the Board of Control. But at least with Board of Control, you had, 4 people plus the mayor. So there was, it wasn't just one person overriding what might be the will of a fairly strong expression of will by council.
But that's going to play out, and I was fascinated to see, because as we know, starting it off, it's going to be Ottawa and Toronto with the strong mayor system, and John Tory is in favor of that, as we know, and he got a lot of pushback at that council meeting, and they talk about it. I think a couple of the councilors actually decided to walk out of the meeting. They were so upset about it. Now he's the premier now is saying, well, we're going to expand that. And I assume Hamilton and London and Burlington may well be on that list, and a few other cities as well. So they seem committed to it, no matter what kind of pushback they're getting.
Well, it's interesting talking about Tory, because just a couple of days ago, or perhaps it was yesterday, where now he's talking about asking Doug Ford to put a time limit on the strong mayor policy. And what that makes me think of is somebody calling the gamblers hotline and asking to be put on the problem sheet because they can't look after themselves. And here he is now suggesting that maybe the premier should consider limiting at least the time period that strong mayor thing would be allowed. So I think Tory in Toronto, the Ottawa mayor has already ruled himself out. He said he's not going to participate. But I think Tory is really getting the heat, not only from his council, but I'm sure that phone and email, I'm sure he's just getting a lot of incoming about, especially because he actually asked for an extension of the power after not talking about any kind of increased power for himself during the campaign. He breezed through the election without really any major issues at all. And then all of a sudden, he wants to go even further than Ford had originally thought.
So how does the premier handle this? I think one of the things that people were impressed with Ford this past year, before the election, that is that he seemed to become more flexible. And we thought, oh, maybe he's learning, he's growing into this job. He did change his mind from time to time on some issues that became rather controversial, including wanting to hire a friend of his as the chief of police and expanding the Greenbelt. We all know how that ended up. But it just seems as if that flexibility, that kinder, gentler, Doug Ford is no longer here. I mean, now it's back to the old guy again. Like, I'm going to ram this thing through. I'm going to build that damn highway, and I'm going to go into the Greenbelt, and I don't care what you say about it.
Well, any government that's reelected with a majority, they tend to try to bottle up all the tough love in the first year. It's the furthest year from their next election, so it's not surprising that he would push forward some of his more controversial policies. But at the end of the day, I think he still has that quality about him. Whether you're a detractor of Ford or not, he does seem to be somewhat pragmatic. And when he sees something that's just going terribly wrong, he has reversed himself. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some softening, maybe on the strong mayor. Not sure about what he can do about the Greenbelt issue. I see him as somebody who, sort of likes to brandish the weapons, but then when you actually get around to the actual use of them, what's it going to look like on the ground? We still haven't seen, and of course, because of the election and the holidays, it's going to be the spring sometime before we see a council, probably Toronto Council, in a situation where he might have to play the strong mayor card. And so we haven't really seen what it looks like in reality yet. It's just a concept that's floating there, and there's no point trying to predict what it's going to look like. We just have to kind of hang on to our hats, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know the man. I mean, I've had him on the show, but I did the radio interviews. Obviously because of COVID, but I hear the same things. Always a nice guy. He may well be. But the question I keep asking when we see some of these questionable policy decisions is, who is he listening to? When you get public opinion, like Prince on the Greenbelt, and I think he was surprised by the pushback he got on that. Maybe we have evolved. The people of Ontario, we are more environmentally conscious. Maybe we see the benefit of things like a Greenbelt, and maybe he's not getting that message. And it's kind of likened to what we talked about a year ago. Well, the COVID and the lockdowns were still going on. We remember he had the science panel, and Dr. Peter Jüni, who was in charge of that panel, was on the show numerous times, and basically saying, this is not what we're recommending to him. I don't know where he's coming from. And you wonder, well, who's telling him to do it then, or who's recommending that he do it then? And I think people are asking that question about a few of these other policy decisions now.
Well, I saw in one of the columns, it might have been one of the National Post writers, or it might have been Brian Lilly with the Sun. This is 3 or 4 weeks ago. Just a kind of a cryptic comment that Dean French, his former chief of staff, in that first year when the pre-pandemic year, the Dean French was seen lurking around Queen's Park. And so I don't know if now that he's got his majority, whether Dean French has an official position or not, whether he's calling some of these shots. I mean, we know that there was almost a revolt by caucus against Dean French. Some of the stuff he was trying to do was, was causing problems within the Tory caucus, and he was credited with the recommendation that Doug Ford's friend become the head of the OPP, and some of those other things that really had people upset. Kind of a Svengali character, at least that's the way he's portrayed. So maybe he's being listened to now, and that's why you're seeing all this saber rattling and tough stuff coming down.
It's going to be interesting to see just what happens in the next few months about that. Quick question. We're just about out of time here, but we mentioned, the provincial election, of course, caused Andrea Horwath and Stephen Del Duca to lose their roles while they resigned. Both got elected as mayors, which is rather odd. It looks like Marit Stiles is going to be the NDP leader here in Ontario because nobody else ran against her. They need to confirm that, and they will. Liberal leadership. This is a party, the provincial party, which is really on its deathbed right now. I mean, it's been not in very good shape for a long, long time now. Is there anybody that can breathe life into it?
My fear is that there is not, and it's a very tricky position there's all kinds of probably excellent people around the province that might be attractive as leaders, but this party is in such bad shape that they have to worry whether they can get that individual elected if they're not already a member. And I think if you look across their tiny caucus right now, you don't see anybody there that could really fire up the public and say, yeah, we need to go back to these folks. And if they go for somebody that's really well known and prominent but does not have a seat, there's a tremendous risk that they don't get to enter the legislature. It's tough times ahead for them. And the other problem is, like we talk about the provincial and federal Liberals, but at the riding level, the volunteers and the people that make things happen, it's all the same people. And this malaise that you see in the provincial Liberals is spilling into the federal fortunes as well. There's definitely an enthusiasm gap among Liberals, and it's just I think when you watch the party and you think about their provincial fortunes, the federal fortunes may not be too far behind.
On that ominous note, we better pack it in. We're just about out of time here. John, thanks for this today. Thanks for the contributions through the course of the year, too. It's always a pleasure having you on the program. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll talk again in a few weeks, I'm sure.
And the same to you and your listeners, Bill. Thanks.
Take care. John Best, who is the publisher, of course, of the Bay Observer, with his hand and finger on what's going on, not just provincially, but also on the municipal level, too. And there's some big changes, as John mentioned, going to be happening at both levels in 2023.